On behalf of our presenting sponsor, Northern Trust, thank you for joining us at the 2022 edition of Expo Chicago, the International Exposition of Contemporary and Modern Art. We are delighted to welcome you to the Exchange by Northern Trust stage, an interactive conversation around the art of collecting. The following panel, The Future of Collecting NFTs, is presented by Art World Learning. Art World Learning produces actionable, inclusive workshops and events both in person and online, focused on business and financial health to build and sustain careers in the arts. The emphasis of all programming is on personal and professional development and empowerment, with a guiding belief that the financial health and sustainability for cultural producers is a social justice issue. Co-founded by Dexter Wimberly and Heather Bhandari, Art World Learning is a fiscally sponsored project of the New York Foundation for the Arts. Please join I'm Not Art, Chicago's first NFT gallery, and Otherwise Inc., one of Expo Chicago's founding partners, in setting up your digital MetaMask wallet and claiming your first NFT as a POAP, Proof of Attendance Protocol, specifically designed for Expo Chicago. You can learn more in the VIP lounge just past these curtains, and you'll see people at a desk waiting to help you set that up. Today's program is being video recorded for archival and possible future promotional purposes. Note any audience questions or interactions will not be included in future promotional materials. Please join me in welcoming Heather Bhandari, who will introduce our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kate. Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Bhandari, co-founder of Art World Learning, and it's nice to see you all here today. Art World Learning is super happy to partner with Expo Chicago today, bringing you two panels. So this is our first. And we want to thank the West Collection for supporting these panelists to come today. For those of you who don't know us, as Kate just mentioned, Art World Learning is an education platform developed for those in the creative sector that consists of two programs. One is Art World Learning, which is an online program that deals with business and financial health for creatives, and two, Art World Conference, which is actionable, inclusive workshops and events, both in person and online, focused on building and sustaining diverse careers in the arts. Our overarching belief is that financial health and sustainability for cultural producers is a social justice issue and a key to equity and inclusion in the arts. Our first panel today is the future of NFTs. What does it mean to be an NFT collector, logistics, and more? And I assume that all of you are here for the same reason that we put this panel together. There's been a lot of media coverage on NFTs, but the responsibility of ownership were still very unclear to us. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have these three panelists with us. We have Erika Knierim, Sandy Lee, and Lesley Silverman, who all have diverse experiences with the subject to educate us and give us some context. Their bios are really long, so I'm going to read abbreviated bios so that we can get to the conversation. They're going to talk for about 40 minutes, maybe 35, to give plenty of time for you guys to ask questions. There'll be a mic that will be passed around. So first, we have Erika Knierim, founder and principal of Nomic Consulting. Erika is an attorney and finance professional with 13 years experience helping clients move their companies and brands into the 21st century. As blockchain technology matures and NFTs become a high-growth sector of the digital asset economy, she prepares clients who are artists, collectors, and others for the opportunities this emerging technology provides and the complex challenges it presents. Prior to founding Nomic, Erika was a financial advisor with the Fitcher Group at William Blair to provide premium wealth management, lots of bios, strategies to select groups of ultra-high net worth individuals, business owners, executives, and their families. So thanks, Erika. Now we have Sandy Lee. Sandy is a financial analyst, CAIA, CFP. Sandy has a background in both finance and the arts. Across disciplines, she possesses interest in the transformational impact of technology. Within finance, Sandy is a specialist in alternative investments. She has advised institutions and private investors on hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, and esoteric investments. With respect to the arts, Sandy holds an MA in the history of design and curatorial studies from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum and Parsons School of Design. She teaches art markets at NYU and is also taught at Parsons. Sandy currently serves as the treasurer of the Joan Mitchell Foundation, where she advises on growth, management, and disbursement of Joan Mitchell's deeply generous gift to fellow artists. Thank you, Sandy. And finally, we welcome Lesley Silverman, the head of Web3 at the leading global talent, entertainment, and sports company, UTA. UTA was the first major talent agency to launch a digital assets practice, and Lesley is its first full-time digital assets agent, where she's helped launch over a dozen NFT projects for clients, including Halsey, Cascade, Thank You X and Hans Zimmer, Haas Brothers, Philippe Pantone, and Clutch Sports Group, among others. She also represents Larva Labs, the creators of Cryptopunks, MeBits, and Autoglyphs. Lesley previously helped launch UTA's Fine Arts Division and worked as an agent representing artists such as Judy Chicago and Ai Weiwei, and corporate clients such as Microsoft and Rosewood Hotel Group. She also supported UTA Artist Space. Prior to joining UTA, Lesley was an art attorney at Glasser Weil and an employment litigator at Littler. She's also a member of the Hammer Collective at LA's Hammer Museum. Whew. So please join me in welcoming Erika, Sandy, and Lesley.
Thank you so much for that introduction. That was a mouthful. I'm going to say two things about why I'm super excited for today's panel. The first is that there are three amazing women on this stage. In that space, that is something to be celebrated. This is a space that is pretty dominated by men, and all of the conversations we've had so far, we've talked a little bit about that. The second part of why I'm super excited about this is, as you can tell from our bios, there's a couple of different things that all of us have intersected with and touched. Technology, law, finance, and art. And I think that's the great place to start here. I'm going to turn to these ladies and I'm going to ask the East Coaster and the West Coaster, what are NFTs, very shortly, for those in the audience who don't know what they are, and why are they important to talk about here at Expo Chicago?
Okay, I'm going to try to do the best version of a West Coast definition, but first of all, thank you so much, and thank you for those generous introductions, and it's good to see all of you, so that means that you're at least crypto curious. How many, by the way, who are here own an NFT? Okay, so a good handful of people. Okay, so I would just say that NFTs are digital collectibles on the blockchain.
Sandy?
Well, I'd like to clarify that I am an East Coaster, but I grew up in Chicago, so I'm super happy to be back here. From the East Coast perspective, I'd say that NFTs are objects that are now digital objects that are part of the art market, and so are traded as part of the art market, one. And two, depending on who you talk to, are also investments that are in a very hot market right now. So there's that piece as well. So if you're thinking about sort of the art space or the investment space, you'll get very different answers. And there is the bigger question of collectibles and self-representation and what that looks like in the future.
And I'll give my Chicago sort of midway between the two. I'm going to actually reference my parents who are in the audience today and say that when I bought my first car, I talked to Papa Bear, my dad, and I said, what do I have to do all of this? And he said, well, when you go to get financing, the title will be sent from the person who previously owned the car to the people who you're getting financing with. And when you pay that car off, then the title will come to you. And it's a paper document. And when you sell that car, you'll sign over ownership from you to that next owner. To me, that's what an NFT is. It's a digital, tokenized titling system. When you buy an NFT, you are not buying the piece of art. You're buying the certificate that expresses or represents ownership. That's how I sort of see it. But given that sort of tokenized representation, as Sandy mentioned, there is an understanding that this could also be viewed as a financial object. So I think I want to start our conversation with kind of exploring between the two of you this idea between the commodification of art that NFTs might represent and what it means for a collector who just wants to collect NFTs.
All right. So quick background, I am a trustee of the Joan Mitchell Foundation. The foundation, amongst many things, supports working artists, and so there's an artist residency, there's a lot of work around establishing financial stability and practices for artists. There is that work, and then there is what I consider to be my academic investment work, which is around why do art markets work the way they do? Who are these participants coming into the market? What are their motivations? And so we're really going to focus on that second part in this conversation. And what I would say about NFTs and what we're thinking about right now, the art market has been fairly stable in this sort of $65 billion range. And in the past, say 2020, 2021, you've seen some tens of billions of transactions happening on NFT-specific platforms. So there is this, all of a sudden you've got this piece of the art market that is transacting, and then there's this piece of what's happening on NFT platforms that is about the collectibles market, that is really about affinity, community, and there is some overlap, but I think it remains to be seen how much of this people will consider to be capital A art and how much of this people will consider to be sort of a new way of living.
Yeah, and I think just to echo that, but also to extend it, you know, a lot of people, I know for me personally, the first time I ever logged on to an NFT marketplace and took a look, like my visual interaction with it was like confusion, you know, what is this? You know, what am I looking at? And what are these things? And, you know, I will say that, you know, my background you heard, but I've only really spent the past year and a half in the blockchain space. And I jumped in because I was listening to people talk on Clubhouse about, you know, participating in their secondary market royalties. And I spent some time as a young art lawyer helping research an article about artist participation in their secondary market. And so my ears perked up when I heard from artists who were talking to one another about this idea of, because their art was on blockchain, they were going to participate in their long-term revenue. And that was a really disruptive thing to stumble upon. So, you know, from my year and change, just sort of watching the movement of this space, you know, my understanding of, you know, the actual size of the market, for example, like, and like a lot of that is frothy right now, and it continues to be, and it continues to shapeshift. So in those early days, it was about, you know, what you mentioned, which is art that was being called to from a contract on chain. There is actually now art on blockchain, right? So it exists in a format on blockchain, and there's somebody in the audience who's kind of the pioneer of that. And so, you know, there's still so much, as you said, as yet to be seen about the size of this market and what will look like art and what will look like collectibles. But ultimately, what we've seen is that NFTs are a product market fit for cryptocurrency. There's this ability to participate in media that sits directly on blockchain, and that's exciting to people, and people want to collect it, and they're going to collect various forms of it. And that piece of it, I believe, is really a strong indicator for long-term health.
So I'm going to kind of stick with something that you just mentioned, which is the product market fit for the cryptocurrency market. For all of those in the audience, can you buy an NFT with fiat currency or paper dollars as we know it?
Yeah, you certainly can. And what's happening behind the scenes is that it's still interacting with blockchain. So that first marketplace that I went to see, that was a marketplace where you can buy with a credit card. It was called Nifty Gateway. And the reason they called it Nifty Gateway was that it was sort of like, you know, the gateway drug into buying with crypto. So, you know, there are other marketplaces that also accept fiat currency. NBA Top Shot, for example, which is a marketplace that is built around this idea of collecting fandom, NBA fandom. Also, you can pay with a credit card. And then all of the interaction with the blockchain, again, is happening behind the scenes. So you're not actually transacting in fiat, but you're transacting in a way where you're comfortable.
Now, you mentioned Top Shot. This is not obviously part of the art world or the art market. These are collectibles, as you mentioned. And I hear a lot of conversation where people are saying, this isn't going to stick around. This is all just a bubble. It's like the Beanie Babies. What would you two say to that?
I'll start. So I think Top Shot is it's interesting. The collectible market is really interesting in that we know that this market exists and has been very tactile and tangible for a long time. And I think of Top Shot and sort of competitors in that space as giving people an opportunity to be a part of that collecting community. So there is value in that. I think the question of is the right value assigned to the right asset is an open question. But is there a value for people who are really interested in one thing to gather around something? Yes. I was, earlier this week, I was at an event hosted by Jacques Pepin, the polymath chef. He is 86, for people who don't know.
I love him.
Yes, people love him. People of all generations love him. But he has this community of super fans, and he paints and has painted for decades. And he had a painting and then also paired with an NFT of the work that had been minted on OpenSea. And I had that moment of like, right, like, you can engage at any age, which is amazing. And then also, like, whether or not this work circulates in the secondary market in the future, like, this NFT is something that is tradable or at least, like, accessible within this and of value within this super fan community, including a number of celebrity chefs. And so I look at that as an example of the power of where NFTs are versus maybe capital A art or versus sort of just collectibles. Like there is some nice bridging.
Well, I hear something in that. I mean, that man taught me how to make the best omelet of my life, right? But that speaks to this higher conversation about this market, that a lot of it's built on community. A lot of it is built on, okay, if I approach this, I'm approaching a vast amount of individuals putting content into the world on everything at every age. So as a collector who's kind of approaching this for the first time, what would you say to them in terms of finding that community and finding pieces that speak to them the way you would a collector in the physical space in the art world?
Yeah, so, and just to go back to your earlier question too, I think that, when I say the word collectible, like I said, digital collectibles on blockchain, what I mean is things that you collect. And collectible has become the new sort of like commercial. So, I remember a time when to be called commercial as an artist was like a derogatory term. And collectible is now this sort of like derogatory term in the space. However, you collect things that are collectible, right? So I just want to say that piece of it. And I do believe that, just like the example that you gave, there are going to be new takes on utilizing this technology that have absolutely nothing to do with art. Art was just sort of this like really incredible catalyst over the past year and change, and there will be an art market in this space, and it won't include everything, what art is defined as in this space won't necessarily include every single thing that you see out there, right? That will become more narrowly defined as there's more critique in the space. So, yeah, I needed to go back on that just really quickly because there were some things in there that I was like, I need to clear that up. Yeah. And what was your...
About the community building.
Yeah, the
aspect.
community. Okay, so if you're a brand new person coming into this space and seeing it with completely new eyes, you're not necessarily coming in to pick a community. You're coming in to take a look. And so if you've arrived in an art fair for the first time, my advice would be walk around, open your eyes, like take a deep breath. I know it's a really intimidating thing. I remember the first time I walked into an art gallery and the first time I walked into an art fair. And there aren't really people there to guide you and help you out. Sometimes there are wonderful people, like I ran into Sue Stoffel on the way in, who will walk you around and explain to you what you're seeing. But I think the first thing you should do is just log into a marketplace and take a deep breath and look. You don't have to know anything about a community. You can teach yourself. That's what I did.
Well, I want to kind of talk a little bit about what most people understand NFTs to be, profile picture projects. This is the most vocal, the most forward-facing, The word generative has been bantied about. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about, I think, Lesley, you probably have the most experience with this, what a profile picture project is, why you think that it's the most forward-facing, and what the future of that is for the traditional art world.
Okay, I'm going to come back around to product market fit. Okay, so, but where I will begin is that up until very recently, there wasn't such a thing as a profile picture project or a PFP. Back in 2017, these two nerds, and they would be totally delighted that I called them that, named Matt Hall and John Watkinson, did an experiment. And they had previously made apps for the T-Mobile Sidekick, okay? And so they decided to create an algorithm. And they programmed that algorithm with a bunch of traits. And it spat out a number of these little heads. And they didn't know, they debated about the number. And they were like, well, 1,000 doesn't seem like that many, and 100,000 seems like a lot, so we'll go with 10,000. And then they made those things, and then they had this conversation about how do we make these things feel like digitally scarce and digitally rare in a way that people might want to own them. And they looked to the blockchain, and they saw some early examples of things that were made more ownable, I guess, because they were on blockchain. And so they thought, let's try this experiment, and we'll put them on the blockchain, and we'll see what happens. You know, it was a big experiment. And those things became Cryptopunks, which is quite a phenomenon today. And you have things called a profile picture project or a PFP, and you have things called a 10K project or like a 10,000 piece project, but it was never intended necessarily to be that. And what happened was it was a big failure. They just put them on blockchain and nobody claimed them. Very few people claim them, I should say. I'm sure there are people in the audience who claim them, and I know one in particular. But it was really complicated to do that. And so what happened? You know, we talk about community. There are a few people who bought them that started making a lot of noise about how great it was to be part of the community of people who held them. You know, it's like, I have I drive this type of car, and I'm in a community of people who all drive that type of car. I'm talking about material goods, but that really is kind of it, right? It's like we all hold these things, and we want to talk about how great it is that we are like-minded folks who could actually like call to the blockchain and pull something off of it and put it in our wallet. And that began to happen, and that became, you know, a crowd that rose, and those voices were heard, and people started feeling like we want to buy them, and then they wanted to buy them for, you know, higher prices, and then some celebrities entered into the community, and, you know, kind of the rest is history. And so people saw that as a really powerful example of, again, a product market fit, and they copied it, and they made new experiments around it. So, you know, they decided that now when you hold one, you're going to get access to experiences in real life, and that unlocked a whole new floodgate of, you know, desires by the community. And you're going to get to, you know, have some physical good attached to it. And so that is what you're now seeing today with projects like Bored Ape Yacht Club and Cool Cats, and, you know, I could name one for every animal in the zoo, I say, but you know, that is what these communities are, is shared holders of a shared good. And the way to sort of analogize that to the art world is like, you know, I may collect something of an artist that I love and find somebody else who also has collected that artist, and that's like a really special relationship that we have to each other. So I know that was a really long explanation, but I think important.
No, I think it was,
that?
yes, and I'm going to come back to you with a question after you do.
Okay. So I will add that I think the Cryptopunks experience is such a good example of artists working. And I know that many people in this audience probably identify with that story of, oh, right, like this is exactly what we see in the art world. People are working at something. You don't know what the end product will be. You have no clue whether or not anyone will actually care about it. And sometimes people end up really caring about it and building sort of a community of collectors. And what's really interesting about blockchain is that you're no longer going through the gallery to meet each other, or you're no longer showing up at a fair to have to meet each other maybe once every couple of years. you can just it's disintermediated, so you can just be with each other at your own time. And I think that for sort of speed of connectivity is really interesting. And then in terms of NFT collecting and what it means to, how to think about getting in. From the financial perspective, I will always be someone who wants to look at new investments, but is always going to be thinking about how to protect someone as an investor. And what I will say to that is that buyer beware. You should always be buying what you love at the price that you can. If you are buying at a certain price level with an expectation of that price level rising because of historical information, because of chatter, sure it may, but there's a very good chance what you have may not, even if the market rises. So that's something to keep in mind. I would also say that there are really interesting NFT projects at all price levels right now, and there's some really good generative art happening. I think that what is really interesting right now is that there are digital artists who happen to be in commercial, second class, sometimes I think people still assume, but people working in commercial roles or working in commercial projects, and the NFT space gives them the ability to make art. And I think that's super interesting right now. All right, another question.
I am so glad that you said that, because my next question has to do with the financial markets. As it relates to profile picture projects, there's a lot of news about things like front running. So we have these huge PR campaigns for profile picture projects. Everybody's creating hype. There's this feeling of FOMO. Everybody has to get in right now or you're going to miss out. But what they don't know is that this is an unregulated market. Therefore, these creators are creating backdoor deals with one another to set the floor price, otherwise known as the bottom price, at a certain level, and then releasing that information to the public and saying, oh, this is worth $2 million. So that front-running aspect, that term actually comes from the financial markets. I don't think that this is unintentional. There's a sub-market of collecting and trading NFTs as financial objects or instruments. I think a lot of that obviously comes from the fact that the people that you most commonly see in these spaces are people from Silicon Valley, tech guys, finance guys who have come together, underwritten each other's projects, and released them to the world. Now, this brings up a question, because if that's the case, what dangers does that pose to the people who don't know that that's what's happening? And why is it happening?
So front running is in finance. If you are charged of front running and found to be culpable, the SEC has stiff penalties for that. This is something that is completely forbidden in the financial space. But what's interesting about the NFT space is that it is still, I'd say, non-regulated to self-regulated, but you don't have, say, a self-regulatory organization where you have someone to slap wrists. So it is early enough in the industry that you do have players that are not perhaps on the up and up or have a different standard of interacting than others. And you do have this sort of what I consider to be this Reddit board, Reddit bro, Robin Hood kind of activity of let's bump up all the chatter on this so that so-and-so will buy at this level and I will have made money. And, buyer beware, whatever happens, whoever is left holding the bag may ultimately be able to sell at the same price, but may not, and there's no recourse. And so it's actually it's an exciting time because it's early in the industry, but it's also a time when one has to be really cautious about how much you rely on historical data, 30-day moving average, how much you rely on what you're reading on boards. And really I go back to buy what you love, because even if there isn't the financial stability, there is the excitement of owning something that you've connected to, which
literally just took the words right out of my mouth. The only antidote to what you described is to buy what you love and just collect it because you're collecting it, right? Not because you heard some, intel from, it's just buy what you love and hold it and participate.
Now, these types of profile picture projects are one way of collecting NFTs, but there's also NFT galleries. There's a few here in Chicago. There's a few other places that I'm sure many of you have heard of. What are the risks and pros, cons of working with an NFT gallery, and what would you recommend a collector ask or know going into a gallery that's an NFT gallery?
Gosh, I know. I think that, so my sister is a gallerist, not an NFT gallerist, but a gallerist. And I have lovingly watched how she has built tremendous relationships with her artists and tremendous relationships with the collectors that she serves. And she serves such an important role in the critique and evolution of her artist careers, and such an important role in helping her collectors identify work that they love that they're going to hold. And I certainly think that there's room for such curation in the NFT space. And it's just going to be a matter of taste. Are you going to enter the space and just look at everything and divine what it is that you love and want to collect? Or are you going to have a shepherd? And, the one thing that is slightly different about crypto and about the NFT space is exactly what Sandy pointed out, which is this is a technology for disintermediation. And so in some ways, it's here to take that middleman out and allow the artist to really have a direct relationship with their patron. And I've seen some really incredible examples of patronage in this space. People who are so excited to buy the one-of-one work of their favorite artist, and they immediately reach out to that artist because they can find them on Twitter or in Discord, and they develop, friendship and bond. And it's like this kind of old school version of, and I know it very much is still alive and well in the art world, but it is this sort of like old school version of patronage, and that's really exciting too. And I think there's room for all of it.
I will add on the, what to look for on the, when thinking about working with an NFT gallery is really dig into the artist relationship. As someone who has had the privilege of working with contemporary artists, what I hear from them often is, chatter about who is good to artists and who people should stay away from in terms of artists who have been burned because their partners haven't come through on either payments or partnership or whatever it is. So, with traditional art and NFTs, connect with the gallerist and the artist, understand what that relationship is. And then on the NFT side, also think about what is the gallerist doing in terms of the opportunity for perhaps resale rights? How are they thinking about the dynamic of an artist perhaps making a sale on the primary market, and benefiting in the secondary market as these projects trade? I think this, we go back to sort of NFTs and the use cases, and I think what was really interesting circa 2018, 2019, which feels like a really long time ago, and is coming back now, is the question of artist resale rights, and what is the power of the artist in the art market, where right now, at least in the US, they may sell in the primary market for not very much, watch their work quadruple, sometimes 10x, 100x, and they receive no portion of the work, despite the fact that they have worked for years on building sort of their expertise and their knowledge. Can they participate on the back end in some way that is about equity for all of the work that they put in over the prior years?
Well, and to that point, just for those in the audience who don't really know that kind of understanding of what NFTs do for that particular question, it's smart contracts. So smart contracts were developed and implemented in the NFT blockchain space as it started with Ethereum, and this was this idea: can we use blockchain as a decentralized means of constructing a contract, so that instead of me and Lesley entering into a paper contract, and I trust that she's going to do the things that we agreed upon in that contract, we don't have to make that agreement anymore. When the piece of art that I send to her gets accepted, the payment gets unlocked, and she can't stop that process. So this smart contract, simplified, obviously, overly simplified, also has the ability to do a reversionary interest in the secondary and tertiary markets for an artist. So let's say that an artist sells his piece for $10,000 in the primary market, and then it goes to auction several years later for $2-3 million. He can actually have something in the computer code of the smart contract that returns a portion of that secondary sale back to him as an artist. Now, everyone in this room should know this has been a problem in the art market for as long as the art market has been a market. So this is groundbreaking. But to go back to the gallery question, if the gallery is entering into regular paper contracts with their artists, and the smart contract is returning all of the primary, secondary, and tertiary sale royalties to them, that trust is still old world. We still run into the problem of the artist having to fight the gallery to give them the amount that they had promised them. So what would you two recommend when a collector walks in to ask one of those galleries, how do you pay your artists? What questions can protect a collector who wants to truly patronize an artist in that sort of secondary, tertiary market sale?
I think the very simple question is, who owns the smart contract?
There it is.
So, I think that, and there are definitely exceptions, right? Like there are marketplaces that are essentially technological platforms that do sort of oversee royalty payments and do the very challenging work of combing the blockchain to make sure that all royalty payments are captured, which is not exactly a simple undertaking. There are also companies, by the way, that are, so when I first jumped in, smart contract, automated royalties was kind of a misnomer. It didn't really exist. It wasn't borderless, for example. So you could buy an NFT that has a royalty attached on Marketplace A and then go sell it on Marketplace B and kind of break that trust with the artist. So there are some exceptions, but I think ultimately, find out more about who owns that smart contract. Is it the artist or is it the gallery? And then also, you can ask, how do you participate? It's all the crazy part about the blockchain and the most exciting part about this transparency is that you can find all of that information. And so it's very easy to ask because it's readily available anyway.
And I would add just where I think the blockchain space is similar to tech in general is this idea of garbage in, garbage out, right? Like there is, you can always look up transaction information. You can always, and you should be doing that as part of your diligence of purchasing. There is always the question of what is the intent of the person setting this up? Have they gone ahead and done that work? Because whether it's sort of algorithms, machine learning, whether it's blockchain for title of real estate, and whether it's NFTs and galleries and royalty payments, it's what is the intention of the person in the middle, and how do you ensure that there is agency so that the artist, who is often the end person trying to collect, the artist has no recourse. Often what happens is you have a paper contract now, and it's what can you do? Small claims court? Or do you spend all of your money on legal fees for something that is, there are a number of cases in the art world right now where it's do you spend all of your efforts to reclaim something, efforts and time and money, to reclaim something from a gallery that may or may not have any funds left? So wherever you can, it is ensuring that the artist as the producer at the end is the beneficiary of that smart contract.
Well, and the hard part about what you just said is I could spend an hour talking to you, minimum, the two of you, about that specific
all day.
aspect of it, right? All day long. But we only have an hour. So as we wrap this up, I want to just say a special thank you to Lesley and Sandy for coming today, and for all of you for joining us. And I hope that we've given you a lot to think about. And hopefully next time that you are thinking about an NFT, maybe you'll buyer beware, do your research, but end up putting one in your digital wallet. So thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Erika.
Thank you, Erika.